Divorce lawyers of Reddit. What is the most insane, evil, funny, dumb way a spouse has tried to screw the other? Story 1. Had a client whose wife wanted him out of the house. I told him not to leave, just move to a different bedroom for the time being, because once he was out, the chances of ever getting him back in were slim. He texted his wife and he told her he was staying in the house. She called and left a VM that she wanted him out, and if he wasn't out soon, she would start taking out her unhappiness on the children, and would remind the children that mommy was being mean to them because daddy wouldn't leave. So this is just the extreme version of like using your kids in an argument with your spouse. That's truly horrible. I think I can see why this divorce was happening. We now have a Discord. Check out the server in the link in the description. Story 2. I work for a divorce attorney now, but the craziest thing came to my attention when I worked for the prosecuting attorney. This couple was breaking up and Mr. left the house. Mrs. went to work the next morning as usual. When she returned home in the evening, she found Mr. had been to the house and removed all of his clothing and belongings as she expected. What she didn't notice was that he had also gorilla glued her belongings together. He glued the TV remote to the table, the phone to its cradle, the couch pillows to the couch, and even glued the vacuum cleaner to the carpet. She called the police and reported this as property damage. The police went with her through the house, documenting dozens of items glued to various things. But for days, she was discovering random things and she would have to call to amend or update her report. My gosh darn oven mitts were glued to the wall. Or, he glued the effing sheets together in the linen closet. I've seen people do and say really awful things to each other, but that was diabolical. Story 3. This one hits close to home because it happened between my parents. We had a family friend who was a lawyer, and my parents agreed that he would be the lawyer for both of them as a mediator. So as the assets were being divided, my dad got absolutely slammed. She was going to get the house, cars, half his retirement, and an insane amount of alimony to the tune of like $2,500 a month. And that's for the rest of her life. My dad has a good job as a municipal employee, but that was probably 70% of his paycheck. Turns out that my mom and the family friend actually conspired to rip my dad off and make it seem like that's what a divorce settlement looks like. And she was going to kick back more money under the table after the dust had settled. Dad just didn't know how these things worked. So after some convincing, he finally went out and got his own lawyer. He got a very fair divorce settlement after that. Mom still to this day can't understand why we don't talk to her much. Story 4. How about a wholesome, insane one? I am not a lawyer, but this was told to me by my mom regarding the divorce she got from my dad. They couldn't settle on an alimony amount. Mom and her lawyer came in with a number, and dad countered with a number. They just couldn't agree. Because my dad thought my mom should get twice the amount in alimony she was asking for, and my mom didn't want my dad to give her that much money for a month. It took months for them to settle on a figure that appeased both of them. Even then, my mom puts aside the extra above what she wanted in case my dad ever has a financial emergency. And my dad puts aside the extra she didn't want in case my mom ever has a financial emergency. The funny thing is, they don't know the other is putting money aside for the other. My mom told me about her emergency stash, and my dad told my brother about his. Brother and I discussed it while talking about what nut jobs our parents are. That is really sweet. I wonder what happened to make them divorce. It was probably just discovering that they weren't good life partners for each other, but they still liked each other. This is very wholesome. Thank you so much, OP. I feel like the rest of this thread is not going to be so kind. Story 5. Worked at an airport. Big burly guy brings an ugly dog in a crate to the counter. He is clearly misty-eyed. Turns out, wife got the dog in the divorce and he has to send it to her, and she told him as soon as she gets it, she's putting it down. He asks if he can have some time with the dog before the flight, so they go out in the grass and both just roll around. Dog's tail just wagging away, not knowing anything about his future. The guy puts him back in the crate, drops him off at the counter, says thanks, and then just walked out, head down, and just looking crushed. That was 30 years ago, and I still remember it like it was yesterday. I can't imagine the level of spite you would need to do this to someone. Like, first of all, that's completely disregarding the existence of a living being, like the dog. And secondly, it's just so pointless. It's just, oh, I'm taking this away from you because you like it. It's not even a fair, like, split sort of thing. Awful. Story 6. I represented a guy who was on his second marriage. His first wife passed away from cancer. He and his kids were obviously devastated. My client was a pretty sensitive guy with a big heart. His second wife could be very charming, which is why he fell for her, but it was all a facade. Anyway, to make a long story about a lengthy divorce short, My client met a very kind and affectionate woman during the case. They really hit it off and were basically engaged, even though his divorce was far from over. The fiancé started having health problems and was diagnosed with a form of terminal cancer. Somehow, the second wife found out about this and tried to use the cancer diagnosis against my client in court. She developed this crazy theory that my client had killed his first wife by giving her cancer, and that he was doing the same thing to his fiancée. The second wife's attorney, who was quite good, refused to be a party to it. The attorney never addressed the argument in court and didn't even ask the second wife any questions about it during testimony. Rather, the attorney informed the judge that the second wife wished to address the court directly about an issue. The judge allowed her to do so, which is highly irregular. The second wife told her crazy conspiracy theory to the judge, adding that she was certain my client had tried to give her cancer at some point as well. I wish I had an artist's rendering of the scene, capturing the second wife's crazy eyes, her attorney's look of shame and embarrassment, the judge's look of confusion/ennui, and my look of awe-inspired disgust. Story 7. Friend was going through divorce from insane husband. He had been texting her pics of the gun he bought and threatening her. Police were called. Nothing they could do because it was only a picture. He was staying with a secret girlfriend at this point. She allowed him to go get his stuff from the house. She was scared to go back in the house alone. I went with her. First red flag was he had changed the locks. So we waited for the locksmith to open the house and change the locks again. Well, when the door opens, we noticed all of the furniture was gone. So we carefully went upstairs in search of her cats. The entire second floor was empty. No cats. No furniture, even her clothes were gone. Come to find out, he hired a moving company to pack and take everything away, even the food in the fridge. Finally found the cats. He had taken them to another vet in town and put them up for boarding under his sister's name, thinking she wouldn't be able to find them. He was finally forced to disclose what happened to her possessions. He had taken them to a storage unit far away from the home. Story 8. Paralegal for a divorce lawyer. This one is morbid. We represented a guy who vehemently believed that his wife was assaulting the children. The authorities were involved, child services was involved. It was never clear what the truth was or if anything at all was going on, but our client was sure. He unalived his wife at a custody exchange in front of the children. He then just sat down and waited for authorities. We visited him in jail with his criminal defense attorney. As we were leaving, he told me, "Well, I guess the divorce is over now," and he laughed. That was the first time I had ever been speechless. Edit. This has gotten a lot of responses. I can't really reveal details or context here, but I can safely say that defending this action as heroic or understandable is an incorrect takeaway. There are no heroes here. The trauma this man put the children through is incredibly selfish, regardless of his intentions. There are so many other options that could have been explored, many of which were being explored when this happened. He just abruptly put an end to all of them, making the truth forever impossible to discern. Story 9. I was an assistant for a family law practice, not a lawyer. So it was already a disaster of a divorce because the ex-husband was a jerk. But it got so much worse when the wife started dating someone new with a severe cat allergy like a year after they split up. Her psycho ex bought a cat on his time with the kids, except he's not allowed pets at his apartment. He sends the kids back to their mom's house with the cat and all its stuff. Mom is upset because she didn't want a cat at all, plus her boyfriend is crazy allergic. She calls us asking what to do because her kids are bawling, saying that she can't get rid of their new sibling and she has the cat in the garage. Ex told the kids, "If mommy loves you, she'll let you keep the cat, since daddy is not allowed cats at his house." Story 10. My friend's dad, Alan, is a lawyer and does mostly divorces and custody cases. The state where he practices had a lot of mediated divorces. I guess they're faster and cheaper than the traditional route. He had a couple come in that had already figured out the division of property, custody, support, etc. Alan figures it'll be a quick afternoon and he'll head home in time for dinner. He's reviewing everything with them and gets to the question of which parent should be called first if the child gets sick or hurt at school or camp. Well, for some reason this turned into a huge issue. Each parent wanted to be the one who was called first. The couple argued for an hour, for which Alan was being paid hundreds of dollars. After an hour, Alan suggested that they split, take a break, collect themselves, and start discussions anew on another day. Or maybe talk about it on their own and come see Alan when they figured it out. Nope. The couple insisted on ironing it out right then and there. They fought for 6 hours while Alan just sat there and listened. They refused his help, and they refused to come to an agreement. By this time, it was almost 8 p.m., and Alan said, "I don't care what you two do, but I'm going home to my wife right now." For some reason, that seemed to make everything click for them, and they did eventually resolve it. Not sure why it took 6 hours and a couple $1,000s to do it, but they did. Guess everyone has a hill to die on. Story 11. I see a lot of unsubstantiated accusations of child abuse to deteriorate the relationship between dad and the kids. And we'll hire experts and therapists, and there will even be an investigation. We'll have depositions and a trial, and after a year has passed without dad being allowed to see his children and thousands of dollars having been spent, it will come out that nothing happened. This happens in my practice about once or twice a year. Very common. Story 12. I worked at a computer repair store as a sales technician. Had a guy come in with a desktop and he wanted Windows reinstalled. I asked him if he wanted me to back up all of his data first, and he told me that he had everything he wanted, so just do the wipe. I put it in the queue and he paid and left. I started it about an hour later since an XP install was only about 45 minutes off the network. I didn't bother doing anything else except deleting the original partition and making a new one and installing Windows. About an hour after that, his wife came running in and asking if we had a computer with Smith as the last name. I told her I did, and she showed me her ID and said that her husband brought it in to try and destroy all of the proof of him cheating and stealing money from their business. When she asked if I had wiped everything yet, I told her I just did a Windows install and didn't actually wipe anything. I called her husband and told him the situation. I told him his wife was here to get the computer. He asked me if I reinstalled Windows like we spoke about, and I told him I had. He told me, I don't give a crap, give her the computer. There isn't anything left on it anyway. I said, all right, and hung up. I told her that he said I could give it to her, and then explained to her how reinstalling Windows doesn't magically delete everything, and explained how I could recover all of her files in a couple of hours. I ended up staying late that night and she bought me pizza and a Mountain Dew. I ended up recovering every file he tried to have me destroy and made multiple copies for her. She ended up calling him from the store and reading off some of the messages he had tried to delete from his emails. I was worried that he might try to come back and confront me, but nothing ever came of it. I do kinda have to commend the jerk husband here. It was a smart idea. It was the wrong idea. It didn't work, but it was kinda smart. It was very possible that if he had told the right instructions and everything, or just knew how to wipe a computer himself, I guess, then it would have worked. So evil, but a little smart. Not genius, obviously, it failed, but a little smart. Story 13. Not my case, but during my first year of law school, lawyers from different practices came to give us a peek behind the curtains of different areas. The divorce lawyer told the story of a rather well-to-do couple that spent months and many tens of thousands of dollars fighting over absolutely everything, all the way down to a single ceramic ashtray. He couldn't remember the significance, but somehow it had come through the husband's family. Even after everything had been decided, they spent many more months and nearly $100,000 fighting over just this ashtray. Then, after a court hearing, the wife finally won the ashtray. She promptly strode out to the white courthouse steps and smashed it. Left the pieces all over for the husband to see on his way out. Decided that day, I did not want to be a divorce lawyer. Story 14. Have a friend who went through a nasty divorce and his ex was vengeful as hell, despite him having done nothing wrong like cheating or lying. Basically, he got laid off from a good job and the loss of status embarrassed her, especially as he took to being a stay-at-home dad and their kids adored him. Never mind the fact that she had an MBA and a six-figure job herself. She would buy expensive crap on credit cards to show high expenses, then return it for cash or store credit so that the refund didn't go back on card, so that she could try to get more support. To just get a job, he took one at Home Depot. He'd been an engineer at a tech company. Later on, he landed an IT consulting position that was part-time but paid about what he made at Home Depot working full-time. She petitioned the courts to try and force him to have a full-time job, basically wanting to force him to spend 30 more hours to earn the same. And part of his custody granted him dinner one night a week with the kids, 5 to 7 p.m. He asked for it to be school pickup to 7 p.m. instead, and she refused that, even though from 3 to 5 they were at home with a nanny, who had to be paid for that time while mom was at work. Story 15. Former divorce lawyer. Not so much insane, but unfortunately common. Accusing former spouse of intimately abusing the children and domestic violence to retain full custody, and getting a restraining order to force the spouse out of the marital home. This sets the new status quo for custody, which judges are reluctant to disrupt considerably down the road. Takes months, if not years, for accused spouse to prove his innocence. And CPS will often find evidence where none exists if accusing party is a good enough manipulator. Pretty horrendous long-term outcome for all parties. Kids are brainwashed against estranged parent when young. Later, they often grow to resent the accusing parent for poisoning their relationship with the estranged one. Kids often grow up with multitudes of mental health issues. Probably one of the worst things a person can do to their children, all to win against their former spouse. Oh, I do not like how this one came up twice. First of all, lying to get your way in a divorce should just immediately be a red flag that you are doing something wrong and like you're in the wrong here. But then to disrupt your kids' lives, it just shows that you don't care about like anyone but yourself. Like, come on, get over yourself. Story 16. Not a lawyer, just grew up with a really crappy family situation. My mom was an evil mastermind with this divorce, let me tell you. So my parents had been separated but living in the same house for a while. And it was around the time of the year the family would normally go for a camping trip, Canada Day, I believe. She convinced my dad that we would break the trip up and he would get a week, then when he returned, she would get a week. Secretly, during my dad's week, she got her friends to help clear the entire house out, and I literally mean clear it out. There was nothing left. Not a single clothes hanger, no couches, TVs, quite literally nothing. She chose this vacation setup really well, too. Camping meant we didn't need money or have access to cell service, which she took advantage of as well. She emptied the bank accounts and hid all of the money away. She didn't stop there, though. She also maxed out lines of credit and all credit cards. Normally, this would take a while, but she was smart as hell in this approach. Earlier, when planning this divorce, she had convinced my dad to quit his job, quite high-paying I should add, to start a company. The company was still new and needed a ton of expenses paid, so banks didn't think twice about this ridiculous amount of money being transferred, as it wasn't out of the norm anyway from their new setup with the company. Then, when it came time for my dad's trip to end, she told him he needed to call her when he got back in cell range. Upon calling, she told him that she was on the way out in the same direction anyway, so we could meet halfway to spare us kids a bit of driving time on our way to the next trip. Which was odd considering after a week of camping we all wanted to shower and clean up. But she was very adamant. We met up and swapped vehicles, then my dad was on the way home, while we were off to hide away at a location different than where she had told my dad. When he got home, he thought we'd been robbed. It didn't sink in. He called the cops and started phoning family because of how empty the house was. He broke down and didn't know what to do. That's when my mom's dad came over and told him the truth. He said she left him and took everything. She hit us and I believe tried to steal us, but that part is a bit fuzzy for me. Eventually, it somewhat caught up with my mom. The judge was shocked at what she did. She even went as far as trying to convince us kids that my dad was abusive, and had us interrogated by a cop wanting us to lie about him. The whole situation was crazy. She ended up blowing all of the money on fancy trips and shopping sprees with her friends. And when the judge ordered her to pay it back, she fled the country. Now she lives in Australia and doesn't have to pay anything. Well, you know, Australia did used to be a land where they sent their criminals, so I guess it kind of makes sense. Still, her being able to avoid having to pay back all the money like that, my brain doesn't understand the legal system that way. That just seems insane to me. I don't know how people get away with that. Story 17. Most malicious thing I know of personally involved a coworker of mine. He was sleeping with a married woman, and ultimately the husband found out she was having an affair. Really ugly divorce ensues, during which they fought over a lot of assets. But the point of contention was their dog, lovely GSD named Orion. Eventually, husband gets custody of the dog, and in under a month, has the dog put down just to hurt her back for the affair.